In much of the literature, the concept that I'll be discussing in this video is called the common heritage of mankind. But I'm just going to call it the common heritage principle. The common heritage principle states that resources that are not within any nation's boundary needs to be managed for everybody's benefit. They belong to all of us. This can be understood as contrasting with what is basically a Lockean position from the writings of John Locke on what to do with these resources. That position states that the resources belong to the first person who can reach it and attach their labor to it. The common heritage position is actually quite recent. It obtained its first significant expression in a speech given at the UN by the ambassador from the island nation of Malta, Arvid Pardo, in November of 1967. In that speech, he argued that the resources of the deep ocean, outside of the territorial boundaries of any country, be held in common for the benefit of all of humanity, and not appropriated by any country. In that same year, the Outer Space Treaty, formerly known as the Declaration of the Legal Principles Governing the Activities of States in the Exploration and Use of Outer Space, went into effect. The Outer Space Treaty contained the following provisions. 1. The exploration and use of outer space shall be carried out for the benefit and in the interest of all of mankind. And 2. Outer space and celestial bodies are free for exploration and use by all states on a basis of equality and in accordance with international law. Currently, this concept of common heritage is held to have 5 main provisions. First, there can be no public or private appropriation. There's some dispute as to exactly what this allows and prohibits. It seems that there has to be some way for somebody to use what is in space. For example, if somebody parks a satellite in geostationary orbit, then nobody else can put a satellite near it. This seems to be a type of appropriation. Principle number 2, since these resources belong to everybody, every country gets to have a voice in what happens to these resources. In the case of deep-sea mining, this job is given to a UN organization called the International Seabed Authority. There's no similar organization regarding resources in space, however. Third, all countries get to benefit from the exploration and exploitation of these resources, those in the deep ocean floor and those in space. Fourth, military weapons and installations are prohibited. And fifth, these commons are to be preserved for future generations. We can't use it all up ourselves and leave future generations with nothing. I should note that all major spacefaring countries have signed and ratified the Outer Space Treaty. However, the U.S. is not a member of the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, which established the International Seabed Authority. At the time of its ratification, the United States preferred a more Lockean approach to distributing the wealth of the deep oceans. It's also relevant to note that in 2015, then-President Barack Obama signed the U.S. Commercial Competitiveness Act. It includes the following, quote, "A United States citizen engaged in commercial recovery of an asteroid resource or a space resource under this chapter shall be entitled to any asteroid resource or space resource obtained, including to possess, own, transport, use, and sell the asteroid resource or space resource obtained in accordance with applicable law, including the international obligations of the United States." End quote. This law clearly endorses a more Lockean first-come, first-served approach to the management of space resources. And how it fits in with the Outer Space Treaty is subject to some dispute. However, our concern here is not with the peculiarities of international law. Our concern is with the merits of the various philosophies for handling those resources. We can see one idea on how the common heritage philosophy is supposed to work by looking at the International Seabed Authority. Even though the United States is not a party to the treaty, it does include 167 countries. And currently, the International Seabed Authority is looking to manage 2 different types of resources. One of these types of resources are manganese modules. These modules are much like pearls. Something falls on the ocean floor like a piece of a bone, and then metals dissolved in the water start to solidify on this item. Think of a layer of frost forming on your window. As it sits there, it grows like a pearl, getting larger and larger, but they do grow very slowly. It takes over 1,000,000 years to gain the width of a human hair. And note, this is definitely not a renewable resource. In some parts of the ocean, they've had millions of years to sit there and grow. And now there are huge fields of these golf ball sized lumps of metal waiting to be picked up. And literally, all one needs to do is scoop them up and haul them to the surface. Though this isn't an easy task. The types of metals that collect around these modules are the type that are needed for many electronic devices and for battery storage. So they're getting quite valuable. The second type of deep-sea resource centers around what's typically known as black smokers. What happens here is that water seeps into the ocean floor, and as it does so, some metal in the rocks gets dissolved into the water. A short distance below the ocean floor, there's a magma chamber. This heats the water and sends it back up. As the superheated water escapes through these deep ocean chimneys, it mixes with the cold ocean water, and the metals precipitate out to collect on the ocean floor. It's a lot like Yellowstone Park on the deep ocean floor. Anyway, miners want to scoop up this metal-laden soil around these fumaroles and then send it off to a refinery. As mentioned earlier, these metals are worth a fair amount of money. And one of the things the International Seabed Authority can do is manage these resources so that it makes money. Money that it can then use on some project that's a benefit to all of humanity. However, the International Seabed Authority has so far been around for about 30 years, and it's generated very little in the way of income. At the same time, the International Seabed Authority is charged with protecting the marine environment. Ecosystems have formed in and around these underwater features that are suited for those environments. Disturb the areas, and one disturbs the ecosystems built into them. The International Seabed Authority has done research where they cleared the manganese modules out of a part of the ocean floor. 30 years later, there are no signs of any recovery. On the other hand, many of the metals are particularly useful in the transition from fossil fuels to renewable resources. Finally, the International Seabed Authority has to consider future generations. Harvesting all of the deep-sea modules, assuming that it produced no environmental degradation, would still leave nothing left for future generations. If a similar body were established for space resources, it would control the resources on the moon and asteroids. Businesses that wanted to mine for water on the moon or minerals in the asteroids would purchase a license and pay royalties to this organization that would then use the revenue to provide benefits for humanity. So now, what are some potential objections? The first objection: markets work better than centralized planning. When we open up these resources on the Lockean system, people have an incentive to make the investments and to get the resources developed so that they can make a profit. Put these resources in the hands of some centralized planning bureaucracy, you get stagnation, or you get corruption, or both. The first response is that common heritage is compatible with markets. The Common Heritage Organization can sell or lease opportunities to the highest bidder. The second response is that markets have done a poor job considering public goods such as the environment or the adverse effects on future generations, and there's a reason for this. These are costs that can be forced on other people without their consent. In economic terms, they're called negative externalities. It's one reason why climate change is such a problem. People get the benefit from the sale and particularly from the use of fossil fuels. But the costs are forced on people who are too poor to have much of an influence on the market or who haven't been born yet. The third response is that it takes a great deal of wealth to reach and harvest these resources. So people who have lots of money are allowed to profit from these resources. And those who don't have a lot of money, well, they must pay those who do. Another objection to the common heritage idea says that people who do the work have a natural right to the profits. If I plant and tend to a crop, then I have a right to the food that I harvest. This is the basic Lockean idea. That which one mixes one's labor with, one has a right to, and nobody else has a right to take away. The primary response to this objection is that while the laborer did provide the laborer did not manufacture the dirt that was plowed and planted, or the rain that fell on the field. Specific to the cases we're concerned with here, they didn't create the manganese modules or the black smokers, or the ice on the moon. These are the resources that are considered to be a part of the common heritage. Ruth Taylor suggested a number of areas where the common heritage system could be applied. For example, she suggested a common heritage regime for the atmosphere, something that no national government can adequately regulate since the atmosphere doesn't respect national borders. She also proposed setting up a common heritage regime to globally manage research and use of information relating to the human genome. This is meant to prevent human genome information or study from becoming property. One possibility humanity may be confronting in the near future are corporate patents for the creation of genetically pre-designed babies. In summary, the Lockean system says that the resources that are not yet claimed belong to the first person to reach them and attach their labor to those resources. The common heritage system says that they belong to everybody, and those who wish to use them need to provide some compensation for taking for private use and benefit what belongs to everybody. We are quickly reaching the point with multinational issues such as climate change and the possibilities of deep sea and deep space mining in which these questions will need answers.